In our news bulletin for this evening, Niue cleans up after Cyclone Tony passes by. Village councillors get a refresher course on disaster management and preparedness. The Power Corporation cuts power to the southern side of the island to renew a power pole and part for the Paliasi transformer. National inventory research to determine the best approach to deal with invasive species and protect biodiversity on the island. Niue experienced its first cyclone for this cyclone season as Cyclone Tony brought strong winds and heavy rain over the weekend. On Friday, the Niue Meteorological Services issued a notification of a tropical depression, TD03, that was in the region. By Saturday, the cyclone was named Cyclone Tony and noted as a Category 1. Niue Disaster Council issued a blue alert warning on Saturday morning, urging people to start getting prepared. By 5 in the afternoon, it was upgraded to yellow and plans were put in motion. The Niue Meteorological Service staff were tracking the cyclone progress with information from Fiji Meteorological Office. These were put into special weather bulletins that were relayed on both television and radio. Emergency services were on standby and responded to call-outs. There were no reports of any major damage to infrastructure. However, a situation with power poles and overhead lines at Suila had Niue Power planned a brief power shutdown affecting the southern side of the island just after 11 at night on Saturday. Power staff worked to rectify the problem throughout the night, and the power was eventually restored before work could continue early Sunday morning. People were able to tune into their radios and television for updates to track the progress of the cyclone throughout Saturday and Sunday. By 8 p.m. on Sunday evening, the cyclone alert had been cancelled. As the island started to clean up after the cyclone, the most damage on island reported were fallen trees and branches that blocked some of the main roads that have now been cleared. Yesterday, public servants returned to work as usual and students went to school. However, Niue Primary School had to close earlier at 11:30. Cyclone Tony serves as a reminder for disaster preparedness, considering the region is in cyclone season that starts from November all the way through to April next year. Disaster preparedness and management was on the agenda today with a session for village council and non-government representatives. Niue's National Disaster Management Office arranged for a meeting as a refresher of how emergency management is coordinated and to provide an update on a number of awareness programs. Niue has a national disaster plan that is currently being reviewed. There are village plans, and just last month a strategic roadmap and plan for emergency management was launched to better position disaster management on the island. Chief of Police Tony Edwards says that Cyclone Tony has come at as a timely reminder, and the turnout today has been good, with all villages represented and even those within the private sector, but they're also keen to look at key areas of focus for their office.
The main thing that we're looking at is the infrastructure, and I think the main concerns that each of these villages or councils will have will be basically on emergency evacuation centres. How do we equip that? Where are we going to get funding to equip that? So I think it's a collective working together with villages and how we can secure funding to ensure that they could equip their own evac centres. It's an ongoing problem, but I think being in a place like Niue where everyone likes to do things together in cases like this, and I think we can better work ourselves around that area. Looking at the infrastructure of power, water, I think there was a big difference this time round, but we did encounter a few problems, but I think they were dealt with. But I think we can do much better and improve in doing our systems or getting our systems right. So those processes that we need to work with gives us a good idea with village councils sharing those concerns that they've got.
The first part of the discussion this morning looked at evaluating what some of the positive actions were in response to Cyclone Tony, what were some of the negatives and suggestions on a way forward. Judging by the turnout, community preparedness is a top priority, and this provides an opportunity to look at plans that are already in place and find ways to make them work better.
A plan is only good if you use it. If you've got a plan and you don't use it, I think that's where the concern comes from. So I think it's every village council has a responsibility to share these with their villages or the community so that they could be well informed, that they could be better prepared. So when anything goes down, and I know and you know that everyone does put their hand to the wheel. But it's a good reminder that everyone is up to date with their plans, so they know exactly what to do when anything goes down.
Recommendations from these discussions will give the Niue Disaster Management Office a better understanding of what is needed out there in the communities and will assist the office to determine the best response according to needs. Strong winds caused a few minor problems for power supply on the island, resulting in some planned outages to the southern side of the island. Power is one of the essential services that households need for their day-to-day use and operations. The Tuila areas where some of the last few remaining overhead power lines are located. Cyclone Tony brought stronger than usual winds that proved a bit much for some of the aging power poles, some starting to lean and one of the power poles broke. Niue Power switched off power to the southern side of the island while staff worked on until late Saturday evening to assess the situation. And yesterday, another planned power outage was carried out to enable staff to rectify the problem to a broken power pole and also work on a high voltage fuse supplying power to the Paliasi transformer. Customers affected included those in the Paliasi area, Tuila, Kaimisi, airport area, Huihui, Funuakula, as well as villages from Tamkotonga all the way to Hakupu. Although power was turned off, the word of caution was to treat wires as live at all times, and once the repairs were completed, the power was switched back on. The corporation also noted that if there are any other power issues following Cyclone Tony, then they should be reported to Niue Power as soon as possible. Niue has an invasive species inventory program being carried out as part of an ongoing biodiversity project for Niue. An expert from New Zealand is on the island at the moment, working alongside the Environment Department and the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. It is another phase of various biodiversity programs to determine the amount of invasive species that could potentially affect the wildlife in Niue. On this occasion, they will be concentrating their research around the Huvalu forest, a national conservation area chosen because of its rich resources of natural habitat for bird, rats, crabs and any other wildlife species.
We're doing basically surveys this week of the invasive species associated with Huvalu forest. There's been a number of other activities under this project, controlling weeds in different parts of the country. But this time we're focusing on Huvalu. And we'll be doing surveys of the weeds again, of rats and the wild cats and wild pigs and probably the invasive ants, just to assess their current numbers around the forest, with the idea that somebody can come again later and see if those numbers change, particularly if we decide that some action is needed. The reason we're concentrating on Huvalu forest is with some invasive species, they are so damaging, or there's only small numbers that you can try and control them everywhere. But other species, if there's lots of them, the idea is maybe you only control them where the very special areas for the native animals and plants.
This is not the first time such research has been done in Niue and won't be the last in the quest to rid Niue of unwelcome pests that could destroy not only our wildlife but also the livelihood of our people who rely on the natural environment for their source of food. Niue's isolation and strict border control security measures limit any chances for outside pests to penetrate our natural habitat, and that is something David Butler is assisting our local environment officers to determine what precautionary measures need to be taken in order to minimize any potential risks of invasive species on the island.
The weed control work happening here and the wild pig work. So in a small country with good habitats, then you can often do good work to control the invasive species. Yes.
Any particular species you're looking at?
Rats, I guess, are one that we always look at. There's been surveys done here in the past along the Vini track, so we'll be doing those again. We were just visiting the track today to see how many trees we have to cut down before we start the surveys, and that was not too bad. So, yeah, rats are always one because they affect a lot of the birds and the lizards and the plants here. Also, maybe the yellow crazy ant is one we'll concentrate on, which is maybe a threat in time to things like the unga. They've had an impact on crabs on other islands, so they're one we're worried about. The yellow crazy ant. So it's an ant that you see sometimes around the coast here. Some of the people probably know it. It forms quite large colonies, and it's called crazy because if you stamp the ground, they all run around very fast. They run fast anyway, so I've seen them at various places, including the start of the Vini track, so we'll be looking to see how far they are spread.
Mr. Butler will be on the island for 2 weeks. He has been to Niue on several occasions since 2002 and is looking forward to work with the locals to keep what he calls the beautiful Niue free of any unwelcome pests, or to minimize the damage done by the pests such as crazy ants on the island. And that concludes our news bulletin for this evening. Do join us again for our next news bulletin on Thursday. Before we conclude our news bulletin for this evening, there is a reminder that the Niue Primary School prize giving has now been deferred until next week.